Hello and welcome to this Cadmatic webinar. I'm application specialist Henri Särkkä, and today we will discuss our new pipe spool features released with Cadmatic version 2019 T1. We will go through the different related settings as well as the core features, and after the demo portion we will have a short question and answer session. The new tool relies on associating spools and documents to logistic 3D spaces. The new group type used for including spools is main document. Main documents are essentially folders that include spool drawings and a front page. Main documents spools can be hosted in any logistic 3D space configurations. It is up to the company and their building method at which point main documents and therefore spool documents should be published. For this demo, we'll assume that we have a two-level 3D space hierarchy where the top level hosts main documents and the lower level hosts spools. The first place we need to look at is the plant modular containment setup configuration object under the library here. Here for the top level hierarchy superblock, I have selected it to host main document groups. For the lower level hierarchy, the block, I have selected to host spool groups. Next, I'll go to my plant modular shared settings. So I'll click OK, OK, close, file and options. Here under piping and pipe spool checks, I can determine which production checks I want to have enabled for my spools. So there are 7 types of checks. First, the collision check uses the plant modular's collision detection to check for collisions any of the spool's parts might be included in. The continuity is the same continuity check that is also under Plant Modular's Piping tab. So it will check continuity errors along spools. A delivered length will check the spool against the length defined in pipe dimension tables. This will ensure that the delivered pipe material is long enough to be used in manufacturing the spool while taking into account, for example, bending elongation. The specification check is the same check that is under Plant Modular's Piping tab. It will check if the spool's model objects match the parts currently allowed in the specification of the pipeline. Volume check allows the creation of different kinds of container dimensions. Spools are checked if they can fit inside that container in any way. Here I have an example of a small galvanization tank. I have created a query so that only pipes that have the surface treatment attribute set to galvanized will be checked against this container. Weld clearance will check for minimum clearances between the chosen welded connection types. And bending will check that spools with bending machine bends can be manufactured with the appropriate machine. It will take into account dimensions such as minimum clamping lengths, bending machine height from floor, and so on. Next is the Documents menu here, under which we have Pipe Spool Drawing Settings. Here we will set up how spools will be numbered and what our spool drawings will look like. First, we have a checkbox for enabling or disabling the Pipe Spool tab. Isometry groups are incompatible with the new tool, so if you're planning on using this new tool with all projects, all isometry groups have to be removed before it can be enabled. Next, we'll decide whether we'll manage the spools of an entire logistic containment, in our case the superblock, or only those of a specific subblock or system. I'll note this later when we get to the Ribbon tab. The front page ICGD defines the ICGD we're using for our main document's front page. Line attribute style and drafting style are valid for all spool drawings. Part numbering per spool restarts part numbering for each spool when enabled. Digits in spool defines how many numbers we have in our spool names. I have it set at 3, so numbering will start from 001 and continue up to 999. Spool numbering styles defines whether spool numbering resets the pipeline or main document. Spool sheets with spool drawings can be exported as Excel files. The Excel document name settings determine the formatting for our Excel spool reports. We can edit the data request, which attributes can be used in the Excel file name, and how they are formatted. Here at the bottom are the definitions for our spool drawings. ICGD's spool drawing views and labels can be set for pipe spools and multi-pipe penetrations separately. Let's go look at the drawing views. The top buttons are used to add or remove pages. With the Edit button, you can change the sheet that is used for the active page. The buttons below handle the views. Let's add a new one. At the top, I can see the view area that is defined on our sheet. I'll call this view back. There are two types of drawing views we can create: plant modeler and pipe views. Plant modeler views are wireframe views, while pipe views are single line drawings. Checking Annotate View automatically adds dimensioning and other annotations to the specific view. Pipe views are always annotated. By default, views use the model coordinates. Views can also be relative to the assembly table. Next, we define the view direction as well as the location and size. The location and size have to be adjusted so that the view fits completely within the sheet's view area. I want this view to be at the area's top left corner and fit 1/4 of the area, so I will set the values accordingly. So the view size can be half of those two, and the view location I want to be this here, and I want it to be a back view. And OK. Back to the pipe spool drawing settings, we have the label settings for annotations. These will only affect the plant modular views. And under exports, we can define the PCF export folder if enabled. The rest of the settings under pipe spool drawings are the same as before with piping isometrics and spools. They define the annotations and other visuals for pipe views. Now that we're done with the setup, let's go and look at the Pipe Spools tab. I'll be working on this small area. And the main tool here is the spool list. Here I can see all the spools in the currently active 3D space. I can switch the space from these drop-down menus. Because of the logistic containment selection I made in the shared settings, I'll see a black drop-down menu here. I can narrow down what is shown in the spool list to a lower level 3D spaces spools, or select all block to see all spools within the active 3D space. I can set the active logistic 3D space either from the list or by selecting an object from the model by using pick. I can locate the spool by picking a model object in the spool list as well. By selecting Show Partially, I can see spools that are only partially covered by my active 3D space. I can extend the margin within from I see spools with the settings below it. Under Editable, I can see all spools that are checked out for me. Under Available, I can see spools that are checked in, and under Not Editable, all spools that are checked out by someone else. For checked-in objects, temporary spool candidate groups are created. For checked-out objects, actual spool groups are automatically created. I'll select some spools under Available. Let's go with Pipeline 12 and use the Check Out Selected Spools command to check out both the spool's model objects as well as the spool groups. The command also requests ownership if necessary. If I wish to rename spools or redefine them according to our spool break rule, those commands are under the Define button. Assigning the spool to another 3D space, such as deciding the space association of a spool that is partially under two different spaces, is done with the Assign to Space commands. First, I'll locate an extra length and a field weld. I'll do it for example this part here. Under the field world, I can add or remove extra lengths or field worlds. I'll simply select the end of the path I wish to add the modification to. I'll add an extra length there as well. Now I would like to perform manufacturing checks on the spools. I can select any spools I wish and check them. So I'll go to checks and then check selected spool groups. So in this pipeline, I have two spools with failed checks. And this spool in particular has several failed checks. By selecting it and clicking Show, I can get detailed data on a failed check. First, I'll go and see collision data. It's not a major issue, so now I'll make the decision to set the status to ignore. And now it will show up as OK in the check results. And from the check results, I can set an ignore flag for failed checks. We still have a few issues here. I'll show the volume check result. Here is the volume I had defined in my shared settings for galvanized pipes, and indeed the spool does not fit in the container. And in the spool list, I can add a new column here to show the check results in the spool list. I can select assembly table to visualize the spool as how it would lay out on the workshop table. I'll maximize this window here. And the arrows near the flanges visualize bolt hole rotations if present. Next, I can create a main document from the spools I have checked out and selected in the spool list. The main document is created under the active 3D space and is shown now as our active main document. The spools will be shown as assigned to that main document in the spool list. I can manually assign or deassign selected spools from the active main document. Now I can proceed to create spool drawings. I'll open the main document by clicking the Edit button next to the main document dropdown. The spools will show up in the New category by default. I'll select them and click Create from the sidebar to create the spool drawings. After the creation, they will be displayed under the Up-to-Date category. I can double-click on a spool drawing to edit it. When I create a spool drawing, a 3D file matching that drawing is saved into the COS server. That means that now if I go to do a slight modification to this spool, here I'll go and maybe move the point slightly according to X. Now I'll go and compare the model object to the one represented in the spool drawing. The comparison opens in eBrowser. In the spool list, I'll notice that the spool status has changed from up-to-date to changed, and this means that the spool drawing and the model no longer match. And that's it for the demo portion. Remember to check our documentation where you can find comprehensive information regarding all these functions as well as some workflow examples. Next, we'll continue on to the question and answer, where I'll be answering your questions regarding Cadmatic's new pipepool functionality with our technical director, Matti Siltanen. So far, we don't seem to have any questions, so if you have anything to ask us, just write it in the GoToWebinar interface. So the first question is can we create only spools or can we create isometries as well? This is a spool tool, so we are creating spools with it. so it is not used for creating isometric drawings. And the next question is it possible to make a plane spool like in isometric drawing, and we have the check mark in the under the drawing views that we can rotate it according to the assembly table. So that is automatic, that it will rotate the spool line drawing according to the isometric according to the assembly table. Next is this new spool creation part of the containment tool. And the containment tool was kind of a mid-model between the piping isometrics and spools and the current spool tool. And the containment tool is still used for duct spools, but while the current pipe spool or the new pipe spool tool does use the 3D spaces as the starting point, the choices aren't made in the containment browser, as is with duct spools. Are customizations via PI custom M file still possible? And the PI custom M file is used for the previous or the still existing piping isometrics and spools module, and all the current information is manipulated in the PMM file macro. And then we have a few questions regarding the recording of this webinar. It will be available under the customer area. And all similar Cadmatic webinars are also available under the customer area. Then a question relating to handling spools by manual selection. And all manual modifications can be done under the pipe spool ribbon menu's define menu. There you can select to define spools manually or move parts from one spool to another. But of course, the starting point is always that we have everything ready automatically according to the spool break rule. So we are aiming to have as little manual modifications that should be done as we just try to eliminate the need altogether, that everything is automatic. And then there's a question, can we arrange dimension lines by our own idea in a spool annotate view? And the customer would like to move dimension lines and labels which are automatically assigned. And currently, well, they are automatically assigned, but we are always open and eager to hear your ideas on how you think it should work, because we always appreciate your input. And can we check pipelines like spools? You have the existing options under the piping tab to check the continuity of the pipelines, as well as the specification check and regeneration. Is it possible to export all pages to the same PDF or DWG file? The short answer is no. The longer answer is that we have been internally looking into it, so stay tuned for possible changes to that, but no guarantees so far. Question is, can we create group drawings, drawings that include a group of spools? And that is not possible. A spool drawing always includes one spool. On the main document's front page, you can include whatever you wish, but for the spool drawings themselves, they always include only one logistics spool. And then are the spool labels visible in the plant modeler? And in T1, I believe we came with the, or was it already in T3, where we included the option to show the identification labels in your plant modeler views. So there you can also display the spool labels automatically. A new method for spool production is available for plant modeler for detail design. The answer is yes, it is available for detail design. And it is not available in basic design, but otherwise it is available. Then questions, some shipyards request both isometric drawings and spool drawings for the same pipeline, and for that you will still need to use the existing piping isometrics and spools module. So what you have been using this far as well. So even though we have the new spool tool available now, we still have the old piping isometrics and spools functionally available as well. And is the new spool creation method dependent or independent with the quote unquote old spool and ISO generation? The same spool break rule is used for both, but all the settings under shared settings are independent to the uh, the spool ribbon menu. Can we change the layout of the main document sheet? If yes, where can we do this? In the shared settings, you select which ICGD you are using, and in the ICGD, you are defining which sheet it is using. So you can change the sheet in the ICGD settings. And is there any available webinar regarding editing of PMM file? So far, we haven't done this kind of a webinar, but we'll keep in mind some kind of a script training for in the future. Do all parts have to be pipe components in a spool? Can, for example, flat bar stiffeners be added for a shell penetration spool? You can also use standard components in addition to pipe components in the spools. The spool's name can have 4 digits instead of 3. Yes, you define the number of digits the spool name uses in the shared settings. I'm not aware of any upper limit, but of course there are practical reasons to keep it tight. But yes, you can have 4 digits instead of 3. Do we need specific license for this tool? No, it uses the same old licenses as the existing piping, isometric, and spools licenses. So now we have come to the end of the current question list, so we will have let's have a few minutes for you to present your questions if there are any. Question is, can we still use attributes assigned in Plant Modeler to make a selection in spool environment? Uh, the spools are defined according to the spool break rule, and in the spool break rule you can use any of the attributes the Plant Modeler objects have. When will it be released? I have good news for you. It was already released with 19T1, which was released some time ago. and you can find on our website you can find the release info for every of our releases, and you have the highlights as well as the complete release notes there. But yes, it is already out in 2019 T1. And when the automatic dimensions for the isometric views are crossing, currently you cannot edit any of the pipe view annotations because we are aiming to have them ready out of the box automatically. So if you have any specific issues, I would ask you to contact our support so we can take a look at your exact situation and then direct them to our development if necessary. Okay, so thank you everyone for attending this Cadmatic webinar. I hope it was very useful for you, and I hope to see you next time for our next webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you.